Hello, everyone. Welcome to Study Travel TV Live, a show of news, statistics, and opinion. I'm Matthew Knott, news editor of StudyTravel Magazine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua Walton, staff journalist at StudyTravel Magazine. Before we get started, for the best viewing experience, please put the call in side-by-side speaker view. You'll see an icon in the top right corner where you can select the view.
We are delighted to welcome you all to the latest episode of Study Travel TV Live, the first of 2022. In today's broadcast, we'll start with a news story, and then we will be joined by our guests this week, Cheryl Delk-Le Good, Executive Director of EnglishUSA, and William Herrera, Managing Director of Estudiantes, Embajadores de Mexico, and President of Mexican Agency Association, AMTE.
We'll then introduce a few more stories as we go through the show. If you have any questions for the presenters or guest speakers or comments on the stories, please post them in the chat box and we will read them out at the end. A big thank you to our sponsor for this episode, Londonist.
Okay, then let's have a look at our first story this week. And we start in the USA, which has had a very busy few weeks in terms of international education and government legislation. The Department of State has confirmed that consular officers will be able to waive in-person interview requirements for some student and exchange visa applicants during 2022. Applicants who have had any US visa before or applicants from visa waiver countries who have been to the USA before may be eligible for the interview waiver.
The department has also updated guidance so that consular officers will have more flexibility in determining the non-immigrant intent and residence abroad status of student visa applicants. The new guidance adds more distinctions and stipulates that the context for students inherently differs from other visa categories due to their typical age and life stage.
And the Department of Homeland Security has added 22 new fields of study to the list eligible for the STEM optional practical training, OPT, meaning that international graduates from those subjects will be able to access 3 years of post-study work rights. The fields include data analytics, business analytics, and environmental sciences. The department said the measures would help to attract and retain international talent.
However, on a less positive note, the Department of State has proposed a 50% increase in student visa processing fees. Under the draft rule, fees for non-immigrant visas, including F1 academic and J1 exchange visas, will increase to $245. The proposals are open for public comment until the 28th of February.
Okay, so at this point, we'd like to introduce our guests this week, Cheryl and William. Hello to both of you. There's Cheryl, there's William. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. We just need to, because I'm muting you, there we go. Okay, so we have lots to digest there. We'll start with the positives. Cheryl, which one of these announcements, the visa interview waivers, the less scrutiny of students for immigration intent, or the STEM OPT expansion, is going to make the biggest difference, do you think?
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, Study Travel, for opening up 2022 with the broadcasts. While all three will have some impact coming from the English language program perspective, the additional majors for the STEM in the long term, that's a great tool for to come to the U.S., which may begin with English language training. But the scrutiny of the students for immigration intent is something that our partners, our other stakeholders, have been seeking for a while. That this language, which appears in the Foreign Advisors Manual, touches at the type of residence and the ties to residence. EnglishUSA definitely wants this to go further when it comes to immediate near-term intent about studying English in the U.S. Back in 2005, there was a cable that went directly to the consular offices to message this change. So in this case, the language was reverted back to, in the manual was reverted back to the previous. It's good news. We do believe that it needs that some of the language messaging to the consular officials needs to go further. That students can choose where to study, what type of program, and they should be based on their student application. So let's make it a cable. Let's make it direct communication to the officials. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Cheryl. Just to let you know, I got a little bit of a sort of breakup on your microphone there. I don't know if you could check that. Josh.
Thank you. And William, from your point of view, will waiving in-person interviews help your agency's business? Is there a backlog of visa applications for the US currently?
Yeah, so well, first of all, thank you for your invitation and happy New Year. Still, we're still in January, so we can say still that. And yeah, I think that of the three news regarding Mexico, one, I have to say that the US, and at least here in Mexico, they're really putting a lot of effort in promoting the US. I think in the past years, the US has been lagging the promotion that other countries has been doing here in Mexico. So I think that that's a positive thing. Obviously, with the pandemic, the backlog of visas, tourist visa, and also from student visas is huge. So everything that can help to speed those process is something that we welcome. Obviously, the 50% increase in the student visa is something that I don't think is going to deter, but obviously you have to add that into applying to a degree. About the STEM options that they added, in Mexico, there's a special visa with the TEMEC, with the what used to be the NAFTA treatment, and there's a visa that the Mexican can apply to it, and it's fairly easy to apply to it. So I think that will not affect that much into the decision of going to the US. But definitely the first one of waiving and of making easier the process of visa processing compared to other countries, I think that would have a positive impact in the recruitment.
Thank you. And Cheryl, an increase in visa fees does seem inconsistent with the Biden administration messaging of a renewed commitment to international education. And the timing is perhaps not great for the sector. What are you lobbying for here?
Yeah, the timing is awful. Is the sound better, Matt?
Still breaking up a little bit. I don't know if
Right.
it's maybe your microphone touching on your hair or something like that.
I'm
Maybe.
not sure. Sorry. The timing is awful. We acknowledge that the fees haven't been adjusted since 2014 for all the visa services, but it's, as many programs are dealing with low enrollments and recruiting challenges with the ongoing pandemic, the increased fees also were not anticipated given the commitment to international education that came out of the Department of State. However, so the lobby, the ask here, we have, as was pointed out, it is open for public comment until February 28th. We're encouraging all of our members as individuals and also associations to consider postponing the proposed fee, or at least implement a more gradual increase, spreading it over several years for the industry. For English language programs, because the F1 visa is very expensive, especially for a student that may be coming for a short-term program. But the administration made this commitment to international education to really bring us one step closer. So there you go.
Thank you. And William, the expansion of OPT is great for students interested in those fields, but would you like to see the US go further here? Students in the UK, Australia, and Canada, for example, can work for multiple years after graduation, regardless of the field of study or the nature of the work.
Yeah, I think that, and also adding to what just Cheryl said, is we are in a global, we're competing, the US is competing with other countries in terms of attracting students. So you have to take into consideration everything that you're saying right now, Josh. For example, if you can work during your studies, if you can work after your studies, right now there are countries that are waiving or are reimbursing your student visa fees. So those things have to be taken into consideration. If you're really committed into attracting more international students into your country, you have to see what other countries are doing, which ones are doing good things. And obviously there are some countries, such as you mentioned, that are being much more flexible in comparing to the US in terms of working permits to the international students. So yeah, that's something that we've seen increasingly is a factor, a decision factor for the students to go to a country if they can work or not.
Thank you, William. And a nice little teaser there for our next story, which on the visa rebates, which we'll come back to in a moment. At our recent StudyTravel Alfie Spain event, which we'll discuss more later, an agent told me that short-term intensive language students almost never choose the USA because of the hassle of obtaining an F1 visa. And most other language destinations differentiate visas based on the length of a program rather than the hours per week of that program. William, do you have issues with students that want a sort of short-term intensive program and would ideally
yes, of
like
course.
to? Yeah.
Yes. Again, if you have a student that comes and say, I want to go, for example, in the next 2 weeks, where I can go and study, there are some countries that you don't need a visa if you're only going to be there for probably 2 months or 1 month. If you choose the US, then you cannot go like if you have this very close window, because the visa process will not fit into you. And then if you're limited into the numbers, obviously the ones that, if you're targeting executives, for example, English programs that they want to be very, very intensive, then you have to plan it very, very with a lot of time ahead in the US, because you need a visa. Because again, it's tied to the number of hours and not tied to the number of weeks that you are. And other countries, you can just go, literally, if you're going only for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month, or even 2 months, you just need your plane ticket and that's it. So, and it's very easy to go. So those are the things that at least every country that wants to implement a solid international strategy, they have to look into what other countries are doing in the international. I think the international students is a very unique niche, very attractive, and in some tied to immigration, some tied to obviously the work experiences that they need. So they have to tighten the whole chain to really have a positive impact. If not, then it's going to be probably some positive, but then if you're lagging into the visa, even process, timing, and everything, you won't have the results that you're expecting.
Thank you. And Cheryl, is that something that the industry is sort of lobbying to change, that sort of distinction of the hours per week and the length of a program?
I won't say that there's a call to action or an ask at this time, but it's a conversation that comes up often when we talk about incidental study, which a student or a participant, a visitor, is allowed to do. But we're constantly, and more so in the past year, learning more about our competitors all over the world. I've invited those competitors actually to our conferences and such, so that we can manage expectations for our stakeholders, so that they know also what to lobby for. But it is something that we're constantly keeping our eye on and discussing.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to our next story. Next to Australia, which since our last broadcast has reopened its doors to international students. Since December 15th, fully vaccinated international students and working holiday makers have been able to enter the country, although quarantine requirements may differ by state.
And in the last week, the government has announced that for the coming weeks, international students and working holiday makers will receive a rebate on their visa fees, and has pledged to prioritise new applicants for those visas. The move is designed to entice students into the country and ease a workforce shortage caused by the Omicron variant.
On the same score, the government has also temporarily lifted the 40 hours per fortnight work limit for international students. This applies to students working in all fields. Educator and student associations have cautiously welcomed the move, but expressed concerns over workloads, reminding students of attendance and course progress requirements.
In addition, the government of Queensland has lifted quarantine requirements for incoming fully vaccinated international students this week, bringing the third largest host for students into line with the biggest two, New South Wales and Victoria. However, Western Australia has abandoned its plans to lift quarantine measures from February the 5th, stating that it will observe the impact of the Omicron variant on the other states before deciding on its next steps.
William, you promote Australia in your agency portfolio. These measures on visa rebates and unlimited work hours are temporary measures. Do you think there will be enough to get students moving? And would students prefer a little more certainty, do you think, at the moment?
You know, it's obviously, I think Australia had done a very good job previously, the pandemic. The numbers were rising in Latin America. There was a huge boom of students that wanted to go to Australia and in the long terms as well. And it was, I think, everything that happened in the last 2 years of closing totally the country, going abroad, and it had affected the approach and the image of Australia. So I think these aggressive measures of the visa rebates, of the visa fees, and also the ability to work, I think that would be something that at least put Australia back in the map of being a serious option. We have to see, because obviously what we've seen in the past is that Australia is very, very fast in closing cities, and so we have to see if this can stay a little bit longer, how the Omicron really develops in Australia. But those are the measures that really would be attractive for the students as well. I think right now, at least in Mexico, Australia has been a market that has been probably not even in our first 10 options, because you could not go. So you would even mention, and we had some schools that even closed. So we have to see how the whole industry of languages and colleges are still there. Obviously, universities have not been that affected, but most of the students were going to language and colleges. So we have to see how's their situation right now. But those measures are very welcome as well.
Cheryl, we've already discussed visas and potential fee increases for travel to the US. Are you looking at these announcements from Australia with any envy or concern over potential loss of market share?
I was dreading this question because it's a short answer. You know, the answer is yes, of course, but also, you know, it's a cliche, knowledge is power, but what we have, you know, learned from this pandemic is to learn are the differences at which our competitors our competitors worldwide have reacted the way the US has reacted. We were one of the first countries to open because of all the different policies and legal issues at the state level. I know that causes more confusion, but we've gotten ourselves more educated the last several years. We have been in more better communication with partners on the ground and also with our competitors. So we look forward, and I know you're going to come up with this question later on the international education strategy to we've learned about Australia among the other markets.
Thank you.
Thank you. And concerns have been raised by bodies including the Council of International Students Australia, the Independent Tertiary Education Council of Australia, and Universities Australia. William, would you share those concerns of a student working long hours and failing on a course? Agents can actually be judged on such matters on Australia's PRISMS database.
Yes, of course, that's something that obviously when they approach us, the main concern is to have an international education. Obviously, being able to work helps to be able to pay the room and board. And if that, obviously, it's kind of a balance. They have to find a balance in between the studies and being able to have enough money to pay for the room and board and their expenses. But if they are earning a lot of money and probably that balance could shift a little bit and could backfire even for them, for even probably their parents, and obviously, as you say, in a legal level with the governments of saying you are not probably screening your students because they are not coming to study, they're coming to work, and that we have to be very observant in that sense. But certainly, it's something that we welcome that they can work, and we have to work together to see the results of that approach.
Thank you. Okay, let's take another story. We are delighted to report that the StudyTravel Alfie Spain in-person plus event took place last week. Our first face-to-face conference in almost 2 years, with 104 agents and 77 school representatives in attendance, mostly in person in Malaga, with a few who could not travel, tuning in online.
Matt reported from conversations at the event that both agencies and educators are experiencing an increase in bookings and inquiries at the beginning of this year, as well as relief at being able to meet colleagues, partners, and friends in person again.
So there's positive vibes from the delegates there in Malaga, and you can read more of the quotes from agents and schools in our news story, which I'll post the link to that in the chat later in the broadcast. Cheryl, would you agree with the sentiment that things are picking up? What are your expectations for this year?
Yes, I do. And anecdotally from our constituents, you know, the students that are seeking out the programs are seeking out are very goal oriented, and they are, you know, they're seeking out an English language study. It's not necessarily just on its own anymore. It's in pursuit, in combination with academic credentials, but also professional credentials. And so far, you know, from our member programs, there have been increases in enrollments, in arrivals for this specific session, you know, starting in early January. But we are optimistic that this will continue over all types of our programs as they adapt to make sure that their programs meet all of these goals of very, very, very motivated students.
Thank you. And would you agree, William, that things are picking up?
Yes, totally. I think we are very optimistic in Mexico that this year is going to be, we closed 2021 very good, and 2022 we've seen also an increase in quotes, in bookings and requests of a new destination. I think probably the ones that are lagging a little bit behind are the probably summer camps for juniors. And I think that's normal. I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty of what's going to happen, but for higher education, languages and academic years, we've seen people are eager, students are eager to travel again. So I foresee that 2022 is going to be a good year for the whole industry.
Good news.
And another question for you here, William. Have you attended any in-person workshops since the pandemic started? And will you be hoping to do so this year?
Yes, actually, I was in ISEF Berlin last year. And I do want to, I think that the interaction of being in person, there's no substitute. I think we enjoy being and in a Zoom conference and webinars, and I think that has opened a new way of doing business. But in person, I think goes further in our industry. What we're doing, and we're selling trust, and obviously seeing the people sitting in the same table and just meeting one another. It's something that you cannot have in a Zoom. So I really welcome the opportunity to go back in person in some events.
I hope to see you at Alpha UK in London.
And one of the things that I have to suggest to everyone is that if you're going to do an hybrid event, don't put it in the same time. Probably just because you're in a you're traveling abroad to some places, so you want to see people. So if in the middle you have a Zoom meeting, well, you can do that afterwards, after you go back to your country, and not where you're in another country and people to meet and you're in a Zoom conference. So my recommendation, if you're planning something hybrid, do it in separate timing and not in the same time.
Thank you. Cheryl, EnglishUSA organises events for its members and has been engaged with overseas missions as well. Are you hoping to do anything face-to-face this year?
Yes, our February conference will be virtual, but we do plan to be back in DC in mid-October, and Matt,
good news
there as well. And I also plan to attend study Alfie London, but I can't agree more with William about the in-person. I'm attending my 4th in-person event in just a couple of weeks, in just the past couple of months, and it's those conversations that happen before a speaker starts. It's a conversation in the hallway. I honor and respect the virtual setting for all the reasons that William mentioned, but it's time, and we're really looking forward to getting back in person in DC.
Thank you. And time for another story. The latest edition of the EF English Proficiency Index was released at the end of last year, based on the results of more than 2 million EF tests taken in 2020 in 121 countries. It showed generally rising levels of English globally, with 16 countries moving up a proficiency band.
In the rankings of non-native English countries, the Netherlands retained its position at the top, followed by Austria, which jumped from 6th in the previous report to 2nd, and the top 5 was completed by Denmark, Singapore, and Norway.
Europe remained the most proficient region on average, followed by Asia, Africa, and Latin America. A number of major ELT markets recorded lower average scores in 2020, including Switzerland, Italy, France, Japan, and South Korea.
So EF has been tracking proficiency through this index report for more than a decade now, and has shown English speaking levels rising generally. Cheryl, Europe has an aging population, as do most top English learning countries, which may mean less students traveling to the European ELT destinations, such as the UK, Ireland, and Malta. In contrast, the USA is a neighbor of a region perhaps lagging behind in proficiency, according to this analysis. Does that inform sort of priorities and thinking for you as an association?
This index in particular, we have not we use our partners with the U.S. Department of Commerce, U.S. Commercial Services, Department of State, Education USA, but we're actually meeting with U.S. Commercial Services tomorrow to talk about connecting with markets down in South America and following up on our trade mission. But indices such as this and the information that we get from the markets, from the trade specialists on the ground, are how we shape what we're going to do in the future, which perhaps will be another trade mission. And we're fortunate also, just an example, Education USA, Department of State, reached out a couple of weeks ago asking, there was a micro scholarship in Mexico, and they wanted to find out if there were additional partners that may be interested in that. So we're really trying to collaborate with the government organizations such as grant bodies who may not be as aware of the breadth of our membership and the number of and the diversity in the literature.
Thank you. And Mexico was actually highlighted by EF as not progressing quickly in terms of English proficiency. Would you agree with that, William? And why do you think so?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I want to cry in that terms. It's a sweet and sour. We know that there's a huge need and of improving the English, and we're receiving a lot of companies coming into our list. We were, but the government, this in a state and federal level, there's no strategy for the English. On the contrary, probably the strategy is to not give English. In the previous administration, there was national English program that had an increase, a little bit, but an increase in the budget. And since the starting of this administration, that budget has been decreased significantly. So that in a country where the huge population studies in public schools, I don't see any surprise of having these very low numbers. And I think in the future, if this policy of diminishing the budget is going to be even worse. So while we welcomed working with organizations such as EnglishUSA, Cheryl, so if we can do something in the private sector and probably some governments in a local environment, we could do something. But as a whole, as a Mexican, there's no federal strategy to improve the English. It's sad to say, but that's the truth.
Okay, thank you, William. And we'll take one last story. And here in the UK, the UK has reached a government international education strategy target of hosting 600,000 international higher education students a decade early. The number of students enrolled with higher education institutions increased by 8.7% in 2020-21, despite the pandemic, to 605,130, according to the annual data report by the Higher Education Statistics Agency.
The increase was mainly by enrolments from students outside the EU, which increased by 10.6%, while EU student numbers grew by 3.5%. 2020-21 is the last academic year that EU students are eligible for domestic fees and government-backed tuition loans.
China accounted for almost a third of all international students and increased slightly in 2020-21, but there was much larger growth from second place India at 52% and third place Nigeria at 63%. The USA and Hong Kong completed the top 5.
William, you also promote higher education in the UK. Why do you think the UK has increased student enrolments despite the pandemic? And do you see this growth continuing?
Yeah, I think that the market, we've seen it here in Mexico. The UK has consistently raised their numbers as well, despite other areas, other countries. Obviously, Australia was something that they were approached, and if you have Australia, then you have to divide all these students that wanted to travel there to other countries, and one of these countries was UK. I think the UK overall had probably a good approach in the pandemic, in black and white sometimes, but I think good news came from that, and obviously it's UK, and they have a long time commitment to international education and appeal to the Mexican market. I think it's going to continue to be one of our top as well.
And Cheryl, I know that international education associations in the USA have called for a formal international education strategy. What difference do you think that would make, and what would you hope to see in such a strategy?
Yeah, we would like to, and we embrace the recommendations that NAFSA made for this strategy, but as an industry ourselves, we need for the strategy to include the promotion of English language studies. So it would need to acknowledge that whether it be academic or professional, it needs to acknowledge the whole path. But working with the government is messy, to quote a Hamilton line. Working with the government agencies is messy. But what we are really lobbying for is for an organization like EnglishUSA, for example, to be included in these conversations. You may have shared this story, Matt, a couple weeks ago, but the Department of Homeland Security is putting together reconstituting Academic Advisory Council, which has not been constituted since 2012. And while that's only one agency, not the others, because we need to, it's going to be messy, but we need all components of the student path to be part of this of this conversation in order to make, in order to have recruitment goals that, as you talked about with the.
Thank you. And that brings us up to date with all of the latest news in the industry. At this point, we'll completely open up to the audience to see if there are any questions for our guests or for the Study Travel team. These can be on any of the stories or topics we have discussed today. So please make sure your organization and your name are in your Zoom name or in the question. It doesn't seem like there are any in.
At the moment, I've just posted that story about Alfie Spain in there. I don't know if there's a question in there. Cheryl, we do have a question that was sent in before, and something that we didn't cover in our US story earlier, but there were some technical amendments to the Thrive Act, which were passed. So for those that don't know, the Thrive Act technically made it illegal for US higher education institutions to receive funding to educate military veterans and to also use agents for international recruitment, but that has now been corrected by some amendments in the Remote Act. Was there any concern in the sector over there before those amendments, or was there any sort of hesitancy about using agents in that sort of window before the corrections?
Most associations that I talk to, and again, our larger partner friend are American Council on Education, the President's Alliance, and NAFSA. There didn't seem, they weren't overly concerned because it did seem pretty obvious that it was just a mistake in some language. But you know, that's not to say that we weren't thrilled when we did see that correction made. So I did not hear from any of our constituents who worried about continuing the use of agents during that time.
Thanks. And another question. We've reported on a few acquisitions in recent weeks, including Bayswater Education acquiring Stafford House Schools in Canada, International House Torquay acquiring Accent International, and in the higher education sphere, EU Business School becoming part of the France-headquartered Omnes Education Group. Do you expect to see a lot of activity in the US this year, Cheryl?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. We've reported on a few acquisitions in recent weeks, including Bayswater Education acquiring Stafford House in Canada, International House Torquay acquiring Accent International, and in the higher education sphere, EU Business School becoming part of France-headquartered Omnes Education Group. Yeah, the question was, do you expect to see a lot of activity or growth in the US this year?
In the private sector?
Yeah.
Oh, we hope so. That our private sector, our independent and multi-site language programs are, have really suffered a bit over the past couple of years. So I can't speak to that right now, but we will keep an eye on it.
Okay, thank you. It doesn't look like I can't see any questions in the chat. So I'll give it the last. Oh no, something's just come in there. What's
no?
That's
That's shame on me because I was posting that at the time.
I thought that's a very long question that's just been posted there. Wow.
No, it's just information, Matt. Just
okay,
information.
Thank you for posting that. Okay, well, that does look like the end of our Q&A, which brings us to the end of this week's Study Travel TV Live.
Our next episode will be on 9th of February at the same time of 4 p.m. GMT. Visit the Study Travel TV live page on Study Travel Network, which you can find under the magazine section in the menu, where we'll be announcing the guest speakers for the next broadcast, as well as a recording of this episode and past episodes.
So that's it for today, our first broadcast of 2022. I would like to say a very big thank you to our special guests. Cheryl, thank you for your time and your insights today.
And William, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts. We look forward to seeing you both again very soon.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And thank you again to our sponsor this week, Londonist. And thank you to everyone for watching. Goodbye.